A quiet room. The dim yellow light spills across pale walls. The heart monitor beeps rhythmically, until suddenly, one long final tone. Silence. The heart has stopped. But, is that really the end? What truly happens when the heart stops beating? Is it the final curtain or the opening act of something far greater? Does the soul leave the body? If so, where does it go? And why do so many people who have died and returned, across different cultures, faiths, and centuries, describe strikingly similar experiences? Thousands of years ago, the ancient Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a sacred transition. According to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Papyrus of Ani, the human being consisted of multiple spiritual components: Ka, life force; Ba, individual soul; and Ak, immortal essence. At death, the Ba was said to rise from the body, beginning its journey through the Duat, the realm of the dead, to face judgment in the Hall of Maat, where the heart was weighed against a feather of truth. In the East, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Bardo Thodol, outlines a similar transition. The dissolution of physical elements, followed by the soul's passage through the Bardo, the intermediate realm, facing visions of divine light or karmic illusions. The soul must recognize its true nature, or be swept into another cycle of rebirth. Modern spiritual researchers like Dr. Michael Newton, Dr. Brian Weiss, and Dr. Raymond Moody have recorded thousands of accounts from near-death experiences, NDEs, and past life regressions. Strikingly, they reveal two distinct moments in the soul's departure. The first moment, when the soul leaves the physical body, often described as a lightness or floating sensation above one's own form. The second moment, when the soul crosses an invisible threshold, entering a tunnel or realm of light, greeted by spiritual beings and a sense of peace. So, what truly awaits on the other side of that silent doorway? Death is a universal human experience, yet across cultures and centuries, people have tried to answer the same haunting question. What happens after we die? While each tradition carries its own language, symbols, and interpretations, three major systems, ancient Egyptian spirituality, Tibetan Buddhism, and modern regression science, offer profound and surprisingly convergent insights into the nature of dying. Ancient Egypt, the judgment of the soul; to the ancient Egyptians, death was not the end but a moral reckoning. As described in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, translated by E.A. Wallace Budge, the soul, particularly the Ba, the individual essence, embarked on a journey through the Duat, or the underworld. The key moment came in the Hall of Maat, where the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of truth. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul passed into eternal harmony. If heavier, burdened by lies, injustice, or unrepented acts, it was devoured by the monstrous Ammit, leading to spiritual extinction. This process underscores the Egyptian belief in moral accountability as the cornerstone of the afterlife journey. Tibetan Buddhism. The realm of the in-between, Tibetan Buddhism sees death not as a final point, but as an intermediate stage known as the Bardo. According to the Bardo Thodol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, translated by Francesca Fremantle and Chogyam Trungpa, consciousness undergoes a dissolving process: earth into water, water into fire, and so on, until the mind is stripped of all physical attachment. The soul then encounters visions of lights, deities, and manifestations of karma. The key lies in recognition. If the soul recognizes the radiant light as its own true nature, it may achieve liberation. If not, it spirals back into the cycle of rebirth. Regression science, documented near-death experiences. Modern spiritual researchers like Dr. Michael Newton, Journey of Souls, Dr. Raymond Moody, Life After Life, and Dr. Brian Weiss, Many Lives, Many Masters, have collected thousands of first-hand accounts from people who've experienced near-death states or undergone deep hypnotic regressions. Their findings reveal common patterns: floating sensations, detachment from the body, tunnels of light, encounters with guides or spiritual beings, and even reviews of one's life. These observations suggest that the process of dying follows a conscious and guided transition, not random or chaotic dissolution. Across all three systems, death is not portrayed as darkness, but as a doorway. What lies beyond, it seems, is not the end, but the beginning of something far more mysterious. Death rarely happens in a single instant. Across spiritual traditions and modern accounts, it appears that the departure of the soul unfolds in stages, not in a single flash. The first moment is perhaps the most universally described, a clear separation from the physical body, gentle, often peaceful, and imbued with mystery. Let us explore how this crucial threshold is seen through the lenses of ancient Egypt, Tibetan Buddhism, and modern regression science. Ancient Egypt, the Bai. Rises in ancient Egyptian belief, the soul was not a singular entity, but a composite of different spiritual forces. Among them, the Bai, often represented as a human-headed bird, was the component responsible for personality and consciousness. Upon death, the Ba was said to rise from the body, initiating the soul's journey through the afterlife. However, this separation wasn't immediate or absolute. According to the Papyrus of Ani, particularly scenes 32 to 34, the Ba hovers above the physical body in the form of a bird with a human face, watching the corpse below. Yet it remains tethered to the Ka, the vital life energy that lingered for a short while after death. It's as though the soul hesitated, contemplating the body it once inhabited, before being summoned forward. The Egyptians believed that this early phase of transition could be prolonged or assisted through rituals and mummification, which preserved the vessel and gave the Ba time to prepare for the next journey. Tibetan Buddhism. The dissolution begins in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Bardo Thodol. This first stage of dying is known as the dissolution of the elements. It describes a gradual unwinding of the physical and energetic body. Earth dissolves into water, heaviness, loss of strength. Water into fire, dry mouth, loss of warmth. Fire into air, disorientation, fading perception. And air into consciousness, final breath detachment. As this occurs, the dying person may witness internal visions, such as shimmering lights, a deep red glow, or billowing smoke, all symbolizing the breakdown of the material self. The moment when the breath stops is not seen as death itself, but rather the release of awareness into space. In this state, Tibetan teachings say that the soul floats free from the body, but remains nearby for a brief time. The awareness is still, clouded by egoic impressions, memories, fears, attachments, but the soul is no longer bound to flesh and bone. This floating phase is often filled with a strange clarity and lightness. Regression science. Floating above the body, modern accounts of near-death experiences, NDEs, and hypnotic regressions reveal startling similarities. Dr. Raymond Moody, in Life After Life, Chapter 3, compiled dozens of stories where individuals clinically died, but later reported floating above their own bodies, watching doctors, nurses, or grieving family members from a detached vantage point. Many described feeling no pain, only a sense of calm detachment, curiosity, or even humor. One individual recalled trying to speak to their loved ones, but realizing their voice could no longer reach the living. Similarly, in Journey of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton, case study number 6 features a woman named Anna who described her death experience under deep hypnosis. She said, "I was suddenly outside of myself, looking down at my face. I could see the people crying, but I felt no sadness. I was free, light like air." These modern cases mirror ancient insights with uncanny accuracy. The sensation of leaving the body, hovering nearby, and observing without fear or suffering, seems universal across time and culture. A universal moment of transition, whether described in hieroglyphs, chanted in Tibetan monasteries, or recounted in clinical offices. This first moment, when the soul rises, floats, or drifts from the body, offers a shared narrative of peace and release. It is not violent. It is not chaotic. It is a quiet unfurling, a letting go of density, a return to subtlety. And in that moment, death is not an ending, but the first step through a door that's always been waiting. The first moment of death is subtle. The soul rises, the body is left behind. But it's the second moment that determines the direction of the journey. It is the crossing, the threshold, the point of no return. It's where the soul moves beyond the familiar and into the great mystery. Across spiritual traditions and regression case studies, this second moment is described not just as a passage, but as a test of recognition. Will the soul see the truth or be drawn back into illusion? 1. Ancient Egypt. The weighing of the heart. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, specifically spell 125, the soul, represented by the Ba, enters the Hall of Maat to face judgment. Here, the deceased stands before 42 divine assessors and declares their innocence in what's known as the negative confession. But the most critical act is the weighing of the heart. The heart, believed to contain the essence of a person's moral life, is placed on a scale opposite the feather of Ma'at, which symbolizes truth and divine order. If the heart is lighter or balanced, the soul is declared pure and allowed to enter the eternal field of peace known as the field of reeds. If heavier, burdened by guilt or deceit, it is devoured by Ammit, the fearsome hybrid beast, and the soul ceases to exist. This crossing is final. The ancient Egyptians saw it not as punishment but as cosmic justice. The soul had to face itself, and either ascend or vanish. Tibetan Buddhism, the encounter with the clear light in. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, Bardo Thodol, the second moment occurs when the soul, now released from the body and elements, enters the Chonyi Bardo, the realm of reality itself. At this stage, the soul encounters the clear light of reality, a blinding brilliance that represents the true, unchanging nature of the mind. If the soul can recognize this light as its own nature, free from ego, identity, and karma, it can achieve liberation. This recognition is difficult, however, because the light is so pure, so vast, that many recoil in fear or confusion. When this happens, the soul is drawn into secondary lights, more familiar but illusory, which eventually lead to the process of rebirth. The teachings urge practitioners to prepare for this moment during life, through meditation and inner clarity. The light is always there, but the ability to recognize it is the difference between freedom and return. Regression, science, the tunnel, the being of light, and the life. Review modern accounts from near-death and regression experiences echo these ancient descriptions. In Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss, the famous case of Catherine recounts her entering a space filled with light, where she met spiritual beings and received knowledge not accessible in her waking life. She was shown truths about her soul's journey across lifetimes. Similarly, in Journey of Souls, Dr. Michael Newton documents multiple patients who describe passing through a tunnel or gateway, often filled with a warm, loving light, and entering what they call the space between lives. There they are greeted by a being of light, described as deeply compassionate, non-judgmental, but wise. One common feature is the life review, a panoramic replay of one's life, where emotions, actions, and consequences are felt not only from one's own perspective, but from those of others affected. It is not judgmental but deeply reflective. It teaches. This second moment, in the regression tradition, is the moment when the soul is invited to understand, to integrate, and to choose what comes next. The threshold is a mirror in all three traditions. The second moment is not just a crossing, it's a mirror. The soul sees itself clearly, either through a cosmic weighing, a dazzling light, or a complete emotional review. It is a moment of truth, humility, and choice. Some move forward, some return, some remain. But across Egypt, Tibet, and modern regression rooms, this sacred crossing point remains a consistent and profound image. The soul is called, the soul is shown, and the soul must choose. When we place the spiritual teachings of ancient Egypt, Tibetan Buddhism, and modern regression science side by side, something extraordinary begins to emerge. Despite being separated by millennia, continents, and languages, these three systems describe the journey of the soul with remarkable harmony, as if they were gazing at the same mysterious process through different windows. The first phase in all three traditions involves a subtle but undeniable detachment from the physical body. In ancient Egypt, this is symbolized by the Ba, the individual soul, rising from the corpse in the form of a human-headed bird. Though it has left the body, it remains tethered to the Ka, the vital life force, for a time. In Tibetan Buddhism, this moment is experienced as the dissolution of the elements, where the earth, water, fire, and air of the body dissolve one into the other until only pure consciousness remains. In modern accounts of near-death experiences and spiritual regression, this same moment is described as floating above the body, weightless and detached, observing without fear or pain. Then comes the second phase, a spiritual threshold that every soul must cross. For the Egyptians, it is the Hall of Maat, where the heart is weighed against the feather of truth. The soul faces divine justice, and its fate is decided based on the purity of its actions. In the Tibetan tradition, the soul encounters the clear light of reality, a radiant brilliance representing the true nature of mind. If the soul recognizes this light, it can be liberated from the cycle of rebirth. If not, it falls back into illusion. Meanwhile, in modern regression science, souls often describe passing through a tunnel of light, entering a peaceful realm where they meet a being of light and undergo a life review, a panoramic replay of their life, felt from every angle, every emotion. What's especially compelling is that each tradition emphasizes a different core principle for this spiritual passage. In Egypt, it is ethical integrity, a heart unburdened by lies and wrongdoing. In Tibet, it is spiritual awareness, the ability to recognize the truth behind appearances. And in modern accounts, it is emotional growth, the soul's capacity to love, to learn, and to empathize. These are not opposing ideas. Rather, they form a trinity of insight. Live truthfully, awaken inwardly, and love deeply. Each path points to the same sacred truth, that what awaits after death is not random or meaningless. It is a mirror, a measure, and a chance for transcendence. As the Journal of Consciousness, 2019, concluded in its comparative study of spiritual texts and near-death accounts, the journey of the soul tends to follow a shared pattern across traditions: detachment, passage, and revelation. These constants suggest that while the world may disagree on religion, it whispers the same story when it comes to what lies beyond. If death is a journey, then life is the preparation. The sacred teachings of ancient Egypt, Tibetan Buddhism, and regression-based spiritual science all point to a profound truth. How we live directly shapes how we die, and what comes after. From the perspective of the ancient Egyptians, the heart was not just a physical organ but the seat of memory, emotion, and morality. In the Hall of Maat, it was the heart, not the brain, that was weighed against the feather of truth. Why? Because to them, the heart bore the imprint of every action, every word, every intention. Their message to the living is clear: live with integrity. Make your heart light, not through avoidance or denial, but through honest living. Forgive when you can, speak truth when it's hard, and do no harm even when it's easy. The lighter the heart, the freer the soul. From the Tibetan tradition, the teachings are more inward. The Bardo doesn't just guide the dead, it instructs the living on how to meet death consciously. Practices like Phawa, the transference of consciousness, and meditations on impermanence help individuals loosen their attachments and prepare for the final moment with clarity, not fear. To the living, this path offers an invitation. Do not wait until the end to awaken. Every breath is a chance to let go. Every day is a rehearsal in releasing grasping, anger, and illusion. The more we familiarize ourselves with stillness, the more gracefully we'll cross when the time comes. And then, there is the voice of modern spiritual regression, perhaps the most relatable for our contemporary minds. Through the hypnotic journeys of thousands, we hear a consistent reminder: we are not here by accident. Life is a school, and each soul has its own curriculum. The lessons are not always easy: grief, betrayal, loneliness, but they are meant to shape us, not punish us. From these case studies, the message is simple yet profound. Live authentically. Follow the quiet voice inside you. Let love, not fear, guide your choices. Growth is the goal, not perfection. One of the most moving lines comes from Dr. Michael Newton, whose years of soul regression led him to this conclusion: we do not die. We change form. If that's true, then death is not something to fear, but something to prepare for, not with dread, but with depth. And the best preparation, across all teachings, is the same. Live truthfully. Love openly. Let go lightly. And remember that how we live is how we will leave.